The whispers followed her like shadows across marble floors. In a world of inherited privilege, Mira Chen walked with borrowed confidence and a secret tucked beneath her fingertips. Tonight would change everything. For those who dismissed her, for those who pitied her, and for the music that had lived inside her since childhood, waiting for its moment to break free. Before we dive into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from. Mira's fingers traced the ornate, golden handrail as she ascended the sweeping staircase of Westfield Conservatory. Crystal chandeliers cast diamond-like reflections across polished marble, illuminating oil paintings of stern-faced composers who seemed to judge her with every step. The air smelled of lemon polish and expensive perfume. "Deep breaths," she whispered, to herself. Her simple black dress, purchased on clearance and carefully tailored by her own hands, felt suddenly inadequate among the sea of designer labels. She clutched her weathered leather portfolio tighter against her chest, a shield against the scrutiny she felt from every direction. "Are you lost?" A tall woman with a clipboard appeared at her side, eyebrows raised in practiced concern. "The janitorial entrance is around back." Mira swallowed hard. "I'm actually here for the competition. I'm Mira Chen." The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched higher. "Oh, I didn't realize you're on my list. Through those doors, dear." Her tone shifted from dismissive to artificially pleasant. The grand hall buzzed with activity. Students in expensive attire clustered in confident groups, professors in tailored suits exchanged professional nods, and wealthy patrons circulated with champagne flutes in hand. Mira recognized several faces from music magazines and competition posters. Professor Harlow, the competition's chief judge, held court near the grand piano. His silver hair caught the light as he laughed at something a student said. Julian Reed stood beside him, the conservatory's rising star, his confidence radiating across the room. Julian's father, the renowned composer Michael Reed, observed from nearby, his critical gaze sweeping the room like a spotlight. Mira found an empty corner and opened her portfolio, reviewing her music one last time. 15 years of practice, 3 jobs to pay for lessons, and countless nights studying by lamplight had led to this moment. The Westfield Scholarship would mean everything: full tuition, performance opportunities, and mentorship with masters. "Competitors, please take your assigned seats," called a voice over the intercom. As she moved toward the designated area, she felt a hand on her arm. "Excuse me." Julian's voice was smooth as polished marble. "I think you're confused. That section is for competition participants." "I am a participant," Mira replied, her voice quieter than she'd intended. Julian's laugh attracted several glances. "Really? Which conservatory are you from?" "I'm not from a conservatory." The words felt like pebbles in her mouth. "I study with Mrs. Abernathy." "The community center teacher?" Julian's eyes widened in exaggerated surprise. "Well, that's admirable. Best of luck." He turned away with a smirk that spoke volumes. Mira's cheeks burned as she took her seat, aware of curious glances and whispered comments. The program in her hands trembled slightly. "Don't mind Julian," whispered the girl beside her. "He thinks talent is something you can buy." Mira nodded gratefully and focused on her breathing as Professor Harlow approached the microphone. "Welcome to the 43rd Annual Westfield Competition," he announced. "Today's performances will determine who receives our prestigious scholarship. Let us begin." One by one, students performed with technical precision. Julian's performance of Rachmaninoff drew enthusiastic applause, his technique flawless, his stage presence magnetic. Mira tried to quell the doubt rising in her chest. Next, Mira Chen performing original composition, Echoes of Home. As she rose, Julian's voice carried just loud enough for her to hear. Original composition, bold strategy for someone with no formal training. Whispers rippled through the audience as she approached the piano. Professor Harlow frowned at his program, then at her as if confirming some unfortunate mistake. Mira sat at the bench, her heart hammering against her ribs. The polished ebony keys reflected the overhead lights, waiting for her command. She placed her hands in position and began. The reception following the first round hummed with excited conversation. Mira stood alone near a potted plant, nursing a glass of water while others celebrated advancing to the semi-finals. "There she is," came a voice that made her stiffen. Julian approached with two of his classmates. "Our community center prodigy." "Your performance was interesting," said one of Julian's companions, a tall girl with sleek blonde hair. "Very emotional." The word dripped with condescension. "Thank you," Mira replied, searching for an escape route. "I'm curious," Julian continued. "What made you think an original composition was appropriate for a classical competition? The guidelines clearly favor established repertoire." "The rules permit original work," Mira said quietly. "Rules also permit finger painting, but that doesn't make it Rembrandt." Julian's friends laughed on cue. "Some traditions require years of proper training to appreciate. You can't just walk in from... Where was it again?" "Oak Ridge," Mira answered. "Ah, yes, the factory. District. Charming." Julian sipped his champagne. "Well, you've had your moment on our stage. Something to tell your friends back home about." Professor Harlow's voice saved her from responding. "Semi-finalists, please gather for the drawing of performance order." Mira moved toward the group, but Julian blocked her path. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "That's for those who advanced. Didn't you check the posting?" Mira froze as heads turned toward them. The blonde girl handed her a printout with exaggerated sympathy. "Here's the list. Don't feel bad. You made it further than most community center students would. Her name wasn't on the list." Heat rushed to her face as she mumbled an excuse and hurried toward the exit, Julian's voice following her. "Someone should have told her this isn't an open mic night." Outside, the cool evening air offered little comfort. Mira leaned against a stone column and closed her eyes, willing the burning embarrassment to subside. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Abernathy. "How did it go?" Before she could respond, the conservatory door opened. Professor Reynolds, the department's elderly composition teacher, emerged with a cane in one hand and a cigarette in the other. "Ah, the missing competitor," he said, lighting his cigarette. "Interesting piece you played." "Not interesting enough, apparently," Mira replied. "Harlow has particular tastes." Reynolds studied her. "Very traditional. Your piece was rather unorthodox for his palate." "I should go," Mira said, pushing away from the column. "Strange thing," Reynolds continued as if she hadn't spoken. "I've heard your name before. Chen, you entered the Eastman Online Composition Contest last year, didn't you?" Mira paused. "Yes. I received an honorable mention, under a pseudonym, MC Harmony." Reynolds smiled at her surprise. "I was one of the judges. Never forgot that piece. Why hide your identity?" She hesitated. "People make assumptions when they know who you are, or where you're from." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "The second round starts tomorrow at 9. Harlow is particular about punctuality." "I didn't advance," Mira reminded him. "Clerical error." Reynolds handed her an envelope. "Your performance evaluation. You scored third highest in the preliminary round. Someone transposed numbers when typing the list." Mira stared at the envelope. "But Julian said, Mr. Reed often says many things." Reynolds tapped his cigarette. 9 o'clock, Miss Chen. Don't be late." The semi-final round brought new tension. Competitors who had ignored Mira yesterday now studied her with wary interest. Julian's usual confidence seemed tinged with irritation as he paced the waiting area. "There must be some mistake," he was saying to Professor Harlow. "Her technique is entirely self-taught. It violates the spirit of the competition." "The rules specify no restrictions on background," Professor Harlow replied, though his expression suggested he shared Julian's opinion. "The scores stand." The tall blonde from yesterday, Sophia, Mira had learned, approached with a strained smile. "Congratulations on advancing. What an unusual situation." "Thank you," Mira replied cautiously. "I suppose we should introduce ourselves properly. I'm Sophia Whitmore. My father chairs the Philharmonic Board." "Nice to meet you," Mira said. "Julian mentioned you work somewhere." Sophia's question hung in the air like delicate poison. "I teach piano at the community center and wait tables at Mancini's." "How industrious." Sophia's smile never reached her eyes. And where did you train before that? My mother taught me until I was 12. Then Mrs. Abernathy. Your mother was a professional. She played in restaurants before I was born. Mira straightened her shoulders. She died when I was 16. How tragic. Sophia's tone suggested an evaluation rather than sympathy. Well, best of luck today. The judges expect technical perfection in this round. As Sophia walked away, Mira overheard her whisper to another competitor. Complete amateur, Reynolds must have had a momentary lapse of judgment. The semi-final performances began with Julian executing a flawless Chopin etude. Each subsequent performer seemed to draw inspiration from his precision, elevating their technical execution to impressive heights. When Mira's turn came, she felt the weight of skeptical stares. Professor Harlow checked his watch as she approached the piano, as if calculating how long he would have to endure her performance. For this round, she had selected Liszt, a piece many considered too ambitious. The first notes hung in the air, like a challenge. She could practically feel Julian's smirk from the front row, expecting her to falter. 3 minutes into her performance, she heard whispers. By the 5-minute mark, the whispers had stopped. When she struck the final chord, a strange silence filled the hall before scattered applause broke out. Professor Reynolds nodded slightly from his seat in the back row. Professor Harlow's expression remained unreadable as he made notes on his clipboard. The finalists were announced immediately: Julian Reed, Sophia Whitmore, and Mira Chen. "Impossible," Julian muttered, loud enough for nearby competitors to hear. "There must be some mathematical error in the tabulation." "The scores have been verified," Professor Reynolds replied calmly. "Finals will be held tomorrow evening at 7, with open attendance. Prepare accordingly." As the crowd dispersed, Julian caught up with Mira near the water fountain. His smile seemed carved from ice. "Congratulations on your unexpected success," he said. "Though I wonder if you realize what you've stepped into." "A piano competition," Mira replied evenly. Julian laughed. "This isn't just a competition, this is a tradition, a legacy. My father won this scholarship, his mentor before him. There are expectations about who belongs on that stage. The judges seem to think I belong." "One judge," Julian corrected. "Reynolds always had eccentric tastes. But tomorrow the audience will include the board of trustees, donors, and critics. People who understand the difference between technical skill and true musical heritage." His eyes narrowed slightly. "The finals require a contemporary piece. I assume you're familiar with the work of my father. He's the standard by which modern compositions are judged here." "I've studied his work," Mira acknowledged. "Studied," Julian repeated. "How quaint. Well, perhaps you should reconsider your selection. Something simpler might suit your background better." Before she could respond, a stern-faced man appeared. At Julian's side, Michael Reed himself, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Julian," he said, "the reporters from Classical Monthly want a statement about tomorrow's performance." His gaze swept over Mira with clinical detachment. "Is this one of the competitors?" "Yes, Father. Mira Chen. She's from the Community Center program." Michael Reed's expression didn't change. "Interesting. The standards must be evolving." He turned back to Julian. "Remember what we discussed about the Prokofiev? The tempo must be precisely as we practiced." As they walked away, Mira heard Michael's low voice. "A community center student in the finals. Reynolds and his charity cases." Sophia appeared at Mira's side, her voice dripping with false concern. "Don't take it personally. The Reeds practically built this place. Julian's already been accepted to Juilliard's doctoral program." "And you?" Mira asked. "Vienna Conservatory, after I complete my master's here." Sophia studied her manicure. "What are your plans, besides the community center?" "Of course. I haven't decided," Mira replied. "Sensible," Sophia nodded. "It's important to be realistic about one's prospects." That evening, Mira sat on her bed in her small apartment, surrounded by sheet music. Her phone displayed dozens of congratulatory texts from her students and co-workers at the restaurant. Mrs. Abernathy had called twice, leaving voicemails filled with proud tears. The doubt that had shadowed her since childhood whispered in her ear, You don't belong there. They know it. You know it. She closed her eyes and remembered her mother's hands guiding hers across the keys of their second-hand, upright piano. Music doesn't care where you come from, her mother had said. It only cares where you're willing to go. Mira opened her eyes and reached for her composition notebook. The final round transformed the conservatory's grand hall. Television cameras positioned near the stage captured competitors arriving. Wealthy patrons in evening wear mingled with critics and industry. Professionals. Their string quartet played softly in the corner. Backstage, Mira adjusted her dress, the same black one now adorned with a vintage brooch that had belonged to her mother. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed her music one last time. Nervous? Professor Reynolds appeared beside her, leaning on his cane. Terrified, she admitted. Good. He nodded approvingly. Fear means you understand the stakes. Julian paced nearby, his tailored tuxedo immaculate. His father stood with Professor Harlow, deep in conversation, both occasionally glancing in Mira's direction. I've made a mistake coming here, Mira whispered. Perhaps, Reynolds agreed unexpectedly, but mistakes often make the most interesting music. Did you change your piece as Julian suggested? Mira looked up in surprise. You heard that? These... Hold ears, Miss Little, Reynolds smiled. What did you decide? She hesitated, then handed him her score. Reynolds scanned it, his bushy eyebrows rising steadily. Bold choice, he murmured. Too bold? Mira asked. There's no such thing in art. He returned her score. But there is such a thing in politics, which this competition has always been full of. Before she could respond, Professor Harlow appeared. Contestants, please take your places. We begin in 5 minutes. The final round followed a new format. Each finalist would perform their contemporary piece, followed by an improvisational challenge announced live. Judges would score both performances, with audience reaction contributing a small percentage to the final tally. Sophia performed first, her selection a complex mathematical piece that showcased technical precision. The audience applauded appreciatively, and the judges nodded with approval. Julian followed with one of his father's compositions. His performance was masterful, drawing enthusiastic applause. Michael Reed watched from the front row, his expression revealing the barest hint of satisfaction. Then came Mira's turn. As she walked to the piano, she heard murmurs, some curious, some dismissive. That's the waitress, someone whispered. The one without formal training. She sat at the bench and positioned her hands. The hall fell silent. What happened next would later be described in the conservatory newsletter as a revelation. Instead of performing a recognized contemporary piece, Mira unveiled an original composition, not the one she had played in the preliminary round, but something entirely new. It began softly, almost tentatively, like a question asked in darkness. Then it transformed, building complex harmonies that spoke of industrial landscapes, of loss, of perseverance. Her fingers wove cultural influences seamlessly into classical structure, honoring tradition while breaking its rules. In the front row, Professor Harlow's pen stopped moving. Julian's practiced composure slipped momentarily. Even Michael Reed leaned forward slightly in his chair. When the final note faded, silence held the room for 3 heartbeats before applause erupted, scattered at first, then gaining momentum. Professor Reynolds was on his feet, followed by others in the audience. But the competition wasn't over. Professor Harlow approached the microphone, composing his features into professional neutrality. For the improvisational challenge, each finalist will have 30 seconds to prepare, then must create a 4-minute improvisation based on this theme. He nodded to an assistant who distributed sealed envelopes to each competitor. Mira opened hers and found 4 measures of music, complex, atonal, and deliberately challenging. Julian received his envelope with confidence, but as he read the notation, a flash of concern crossed his face. Sophia's practiced smile faltered slightly at her theme. Sophia performed first again, her improvisation technically accurate but cautious, never venturing far from the provided theme. The judges nodded politely. Julian approached his challenge with characteristic confidence, his improvisation displaying impressive technical command. Yet something felt calculated rather than inspired, as if he were executing a mathematical equation rather than creating art. His father frowned slightly from the audience. When Mira's turn came, she studied the theme once more before setting the paper aside. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath and began. What emerged was nothing short of musical alchemy. She took the challenging theme and transformed it, finding beauty in its dissonance, storytelling in its complexity. Where others had seen obstacles, she found pathways. Her hands moved with assurance born not of privilege, but of thousands of hours of dedication. In the audience, a critic scribbled frantically in his notebook. A recording industry executive leaned toward her companion and whispered something. Michael Reed's expression had transformed from dismissive to stunned. When she finished, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. Professor Reynolds was smiling broadly. Even Professor Harlow seemed moved despite himself. "We will announce our decision after a brief deliberation," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. As Mira stood, legs shaking slightly, she caught Julian's gaze. For the first time, there was no condescension in his expression, only the dawning realization that all his assumptions had been catastrophically wrong. The judges conferred for nearly 20 minutes, far longer than customary. When they returned, Professor Harlow approached the microphone with uncharacteristic hesitation. "The judges have reached their decision," he announced. "This year's Westfield Scholarship recipient is..." He paused as if the name still surprised him. Mira Chen. The reception hall buzzed with excited conversation. Critics surrounded Mira, asking about her background, her influences, her plans. A distinguished woman in an elegant suit introduced herself as the director of the Philadelphia Symphony's Young Artists Program. "Your composition was extraordinary," she said. "We should discuss performance opportunities." Sophia approached with surprising grace. "Congratulations," she said, extending her hand. "Your improvisation was... I've never heard anything like it." "Thank you," Mira replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. Julian stood with his father near the champagne fountain, both wearing expressions of careful neutrality. As conversations swirled around her, Mira excused herself and approached them. "Mr. Reed," she said, addressing Julian's father, "I've studied your compositions for years. Your nocturne in G minor inspired me to write my first piece." Michael Reed regarded her with newfound attention. "You have an unusual style, raw but intriguing. Conservatory training would refine it considerably." "Or diminish it, Professor," Reynolds interjected, appearing at Mira's side. "Some talents grow better outside carefully tended gardens." Julian cleared his throat. "Your improvisation was impressive," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "I underestimated your abilities, All did," his father added, studying her with recalibrated interest. "Where will you go from here, Miss Chen?" Mira considered the question. "I'll continue teaching at the community center. Those students need to know that music belongs to everyone." "Admirable," Michael said, though his tone suggested he found the choice puzzling. "But surely you'll accept enrollment here with the scholarship." "I haven't decided," Mira replied honestly. Later, as the crowd thinned, Professor Reynolds found her on the balcony, gazing at the city lights. "Quite a transformation," he observed. "Yesterday they wouldn't acknowledge you. Today they can't stop talking about you." "It feels unreal," Mira admitted. "Fame often does." Reynolds leaned on the balcony railing. "What will you do with the scholarship?" "The money will help my students at the center. New instruments, materials," she smiled. "As for the conservatory, I'm not sure I belong here." "Belong?" Reynolds chuckled. "After tonight, they'll rewrite their definition of belonging." Julian suggested I register for his father's masterclass. "And what did you tell?" "Him?" Mira smiled. "That I'd consider it after he attends one of my community workshops." Reynolds laughed heartily. "I would pay to see Michael Reed in a community center." "He might learn something," Mira said. "As might you at the conservatory," Reynolds countered. "Talent flourishes with proper nurturing." "My mother used to say that talent is like water," Mira replied. "It finds its own path." 6 months later, Mira stood before a crowded auditorium at the community center. Children and adults filled every seat, with latecomers standing along the walls. A newly refurbished grand piano gleamed under the lights, purchased with part of her scholarship funds. "Welcome to our spring recital," she announced. "Today, our students will share what they've learned this semester." In the front row sat Mrs. Abernathy, beaming with pride. Beside her, somewhat less comfortably, sat Professor Reynolds and, surprisingly, Professor Harlow. In the back row, Julian observed with curious attention, having finally accepted her invitation. The program featured students of all ages and backgrounds performing pieces they had worked on for months. Some played with technical precision, others with raw emotion, but all with the confidence of those who know they are truly heard. For the finale, Mira's adult students, the night shift nurse, the retired factory worker, the young mother, performed an original piece they had composed collaboratively under her guidance. As applause filled the room, Mira noticed Julian's expression, a mixture of surprise and dawning understanding. The talent he witnessed might not match conservatory standards in technique, but the authenticity and joy of the performances could not be denied. After the recital, as students and families mingled over refreshments, Julian approached her. "You've built something remarkable here," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Mira asked. "Honestly, something less substantial." He gestured toward the students. "They play with such conviction. Because they're playing for themselves, not for judges or critics," Mira explained. "Music was never meant to be exclusive." Professor Harlow joined them, looking somewhat out of place among the casual celebration. "Ms. Chen, the board has reviewed your proposal. We are prepared to offer 3 annual scholarships for your community students." "And?" she prompted, knowing there was more. Harlow cleared his throat. "And yes, to your other condition, we will establish the outreach program with quarterly masterclasses here at the center. Taught by conservatory faculty," Mira added. "As agreed," Harlow confirmed, his expression suggesting he was still adjusting to this new arrangement. Julian raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy." "Change happens one note at a time," she replied. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Mira sat alone at the piano. Her fingers found the keys as they had thousands of times before, playing the lullaby her mother had taught her. The first piece she had ever learned, the scholarship certificate hanging on the wall, caught the last rays of sunset through the window. Beside it hung a framed review from Classical Monthly, highlighting her debut performance with the Philadelphia Symphony last month. Next to that was a simple handwritten note from one of her young students. "Thank you for showing me. I can." Talent, she had learned, was never about belonging to exclusive circles. It was about creating spaces where everyone could discover the music within themselves, whether in grand concert halls or community centers with scuffed floors and second-hand pianos. The journey that had begun with whispers and dismissals had transformed into something far more powerful than mere acceptance. It had become an invitation, to herself and to others, to play without permission, to create without apology, and to find beauty in unexpected places. For in the end, true talent is never about who you impress. It's about what you express and who you bring along with you when the music finally, gloriously breaks free.